February 20th, 1945. Iwo Jima, 10:52 in the morning.
A Japanese lieutenant crouched behind the firing slit of a concrete pillbox on the northern plateau. His name has been lost to the American records. He would not survive to write it down. The air inside the pillbox smelled of sweat, of kortat, of the sulfur that seeped from every crack in the volcanic rock. Through the narrow aperture, he watched an American Sherman tank crawl across the black ash toward his position. He had seen Shermans before.
See?
He knew their weaknesses. He knew where their armor was thin, where their tracks could be broken, where their crews were vulnerable to a well-placed 47mm shell. But something about this tank was wrong. There was no cannon. Where the 75mm gun should have been, there was only a nozzle.
A blackened tube.
No thicker than a man's wrist, tracking slowly across the volcanic ground. The lieutenant raised his field glasses. He tried to understand what he was seeing.
And
then the tanks stopped, 150 yards away, and the nozzle turned toward the neighboring bunker, where 8 of his men waited with their machine guns and their bayonets and their oaths of death. He heard a hiss, compressed nitrogen, rising, in pitch. Then the world caught fire. A rope of liquid flame, thick as a river, arsed through the volcanic sky. It struck the pillbox aperture like water pouring into a wound. It flooded through the firing slit. It flowed down the ventilation shaft. It filled every crack, every corner, every breath of air inside that concrete tomb. The temperature rose past 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit in less than 3 seconds. The oxygen vanished. Swoosh. The screaming lasted just long enough for the lieutenant to understand what he was hearing. And then it stopped. The lieutenant dropped his field glasses. He reached for the field telephone with hands that would not stop shaking. He tried to describe what he had witnessed. He tried to find the words. But there were no words in the Japanese military manual for a Sherman tank that spat liquid fire across the length of a football field.
There
was no doctrine.
Daishin,
There was no counter. There was only the burning and the silence that followed. What the lieutenant did not know was that this tank had a name. The Marines who built it called it the Zippo. And in the hours to come, 7 more of them would join the fight across the northern plateau.
Tanks.
Only 8
Checks.
against 21,000 men in the deepest fortress in the Pacific. And by the time the battle ended, flame weapons, both tank, mounted, and portable, had become one of the most effective tools for reducing Japanese bunkers and caves on Iwo Jima. Their contribution was significant, although no reliable historical source establishes that they accounted for nearly 1/3 of all Japanese deaths. But to understand how 8 tanks changed a battle, you have to understand 2 men, 2 officers, 2 visions of war. One buried underground on a volcanic island in the middle of the Pacific, and the other working in secret in a warehouse behind a barbed wire fence 6,000 kilometers away.
Neither man
had ever met the other. Neither man knew the other existed, but they had been racing toward the same battlefield for 8 months.
Rewind.
June of 1944. Iwo Jima, under a hard summer sun. A transport aircraft descended through the haze and touched down on the crushed volcanic runway of Motoyama No. 1.
From the open hatch
stepped aft man in the uniform of an Imperial Japanese Army Lieutenant General.
Sep.
He was of average height for a Japanese officer of his generation. His face was thin, his eyes deep set. his mouth pressed into a line that revealed nothing. His name was Tadamichi Kuribayashi. He had been sent from Tokyo to save an island that could not be saved.
Zurich, Chet.
Kuribayashi understood it. From the moment he stepped onto the black sand, he understood. He had spent 2 years of his life in the United States. From 1928 to 1930, he had lived in Washington, D.C. as a military attaché. He had ridden trains across the American plains. He had toured Detroit's automobile plants. He had walked the steel mills of Pittsburgh. He had watched men in overalls stamp out the machinery of a nation still at peace.
Bill Lyncher.
And he had understood something that refused to understand. The war that Japan had started, Japan could not finish.
America.
Built. That was what America did. It built cars, it built engines, it built ships, and when the killing began, it would build weapons faster than Japan could destroy them.
Kuribayashi could not defeat this enemy.
He knew this, his superiors in Tokyo, in their silk uniforms, in their imperial palaces, believed in the divine wind and the samurai spirit, in the moral impossibility of Japanese defeat.
Mathematics.
Kuribayashi believed in mathematics, and the mathematics told him that Iwo Jima would fall. So his mission was not to win. His mission was to bleed. If he could make the capture of Iwo Jima so costly, so agonizing, so filled with American blood that the men in Washington would reconsider invading the Japanese home islands, if he could turn 8 square miles of volcanic rock into a wound that America would remember for a generation,
Wanna say.
if he could kill enough Marines to perhaps his deaths, and the deaths of every man under his command would mean something.
Gave the first order.
There would be no glorious deaths at the water's edge. There would be no samurai standing tall against the American guns. Kuribayashi ordered his men underground. Underground, he ordered them to hide. He ordered them to fight from the dark. Every soldier, from private to colonel, was given the same standing order. Do not die until you have killed 10 Americans. It was heresy. It was a betrayal of centuries of Japanese military tradition. Officers who had trained their entire lives to die facing the enemy were told to fight from holes in the ground.
Some
resisted. Some petitioned Tokyo. Kuribayashi crushed them, then he began to dig. By February of 1945, 11 miles of tunnels ran beneath Iwo Jima.
Dress. Patience.
7 stories deep in places. 5,000 caves and underground chambers had been carved into the volcanic rock. 1,500 fortified positions dotted the surface.
Underground hospitals.
Underground command centers. Underground barracks large enough to sleep 400 men. Concrete bunkers with walls 4 feet thick. Steel doors that opened only to fire. Then sealed shut. Ventilation shafts disguised as natural rock formations. A subterranean city built to swallow an American army.
Done.
And at the deepest point, beneath Hill 382, in a chamber 20 meters underground, Kuribayashi placed his command post. He was ready.
Danisa.
The trap was set. All that remained was to wait for the Americans to walk into it. But 6,000 kilometers to the east, another man had already begun to dig his own hole. His name was George F.
Unmacht.
Colonel, United Service, Central Warfare Service, Central Pacific Area, decades of military service behind him, a career officer of quiet reputation, a man who spent his life in laboratories and testing grounds, working on the weapons that most soldiers preferred not to think about.
Gas.
Smoke. Incendiaries. He had spent his career in the shadows of American military science, and in September of 1944, he was given a problem that no one else could solve.
That.
The Marine Corps was dying, on Japanese cave complexes. Peleliu had proven it, Saipan had proven it, Tarawa had proven it. Japanese defenders, dug into coral and volcanic rock, could absorb weeks of naval bombardment and emerge to slaughter Marines by the thousands. Portable flamethrowers helped, but their operators suffered extremely heavy casualties because they had to approach fortified positions at very close range.
And their range was pitiful.
40 yards, 50 at best. A man with a flame gun on his back could clear a single cave before a Japanese sniper found the fuel tanks and ended his war in an instant.
Jackson.
The Marines needed something better. The Marines needed a flamethrower that could not be killed by a single bullet. The Marines needed a tank, and the Marines had already tried and failed. Here is the twist that history rarely mentions. The Marine Corps did not build the Zippo tank because they wanted to. They built it because the Army had refused to. Marine planners had requested dedicated flamethrower tanks through Army channels, but standard production denied them for the invasion, did not provide them in time for the invasion.
Dennis.
As a result, an inter-service team in Hawaii developed the 8 Sherman flame tanks used at Iwo Jima. Months passed. The invasion of Iwo Jima drew closer, and the Marines finally understood that the Army was not coming. So Colonel Unmacht went to work.
3.
He requisitioned 8 M4A3 Sherman medium tanks from a depot near Pearl Harbor. He requisitioned 25 men from the 117th Naval Construction Battalion.
The Seabees.
Navy men, not soldiers, welders and machinists and electricians who had built airstrips under fire on a dozen Pacific islands.
So,
Requisitioned technicians from the 43rd Chemical Laboratory. He requisitioned personnel from the 5th Marine Tank Battalion and the 81st Ordnance Company. He assembled a joint service team, Army and Navy and Marine Corps, together inside a fenced compound at Schofield Barracks on the island of Oahu. The work was carried out under wartime secrecy at Schofield Barracks by an inter-service team of Army, Navy, and Marine personnel.
Marine personnel. They worked 20-hour days.
They slept in shifts on cots beside their welding stations. They combined the best components of 3 flamethrower systems.
The British Ronson.
The American Navy Mark I, a captured German design recovered from North Africa. They hand-welded fuel lines. They calibrated pressure gauges. They installed 150 pounds of welding rod and 1,100 electrical connections into each tank. Each conversion took 1,200 man-hours. Each tank cost roughly $25,000 to convert. Money the project did not officially have.
Time the invasion did not officially allow.
The resulting weapon had a designation. On paper, was it the POA-CWS-H1, Pacific Ocean Areas Chemical Warfare Service, Hawaii, Model 1.
Sept.
Marines, who would later crew it, called it the Zippo. Marines who saw it fire called it the Ronson. By January of 1945, 8 tanks were ready.
They looked like ordinary Shermans.
Standard olive drab paint, no markings, no identification. To Japanese eyes, they would appear identical to every other Marine tank on the beach, until the moment they opened fire. And by then it would be too late. The tanks were loaded onto transports. The transports steamed west across the Pacific. And on the night of February 18th, 1945, they anchored off the coast of an island that Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had spent 8 months preparing to defend. The 2 men had never met. The 2 men had never spoken. They had built their machines in secret on opposite sides of the ocean for opposite reasons. And in the morning, their machines would meet on a beach of black volcanic ash. Only one of them would survive the encounter.
February 19th, 1945.
0900 hours, Iwo Jima. The first wave of Marines stepped off the ramps of their landing craft and into the black sand. Approximately 30,000 Marines came ashore. While the total American force committed to the Iwo Jima campaign eventually reached roughly 70,000 men.
Boys from Iowa.
Boys from Alabama. Boys from Ohio farms and Brooklyn tenements and California orange groves. Their average age was 19 years old. Many of them had never left their home state before joining the Corps. Many of them would be dead or wounded within 36 hours.
Breach? No.
The beach was quiet. That was what they remembered afterward, the men who lived. They remembered the quiet. They stepped onto the sand.
They up. Ham to their south.
But nothing came. For nearly an hour, they walked forward through ash that rose to the tops of their boots. The volcanic sand collapsed under every step. Men who had trained for months to run across a beach found themselves crawling, sliding, sinking.
Their boots filled with
grit. Their packs weighed 100 pounds.
Yeah.
And still the Japanese did not fire. The Marines began to hope. Perhaps the 74 days of bombing had done their work. Perhaps the 22,000 naval shells had killed everyone in the caves.
Perhaps
this island, this cursed
volcanic rock
in the middle of the ocean would fall in 5 days like the planners had promised.
Perhaps they would be home by summer.
Then, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi gave the order. Every hidden gun on Iwo Jima opened fire at nearly the same instant.
The
artillery that had been silent for a year. Mortars pre-registered on every square yard of beach. Machine guns firing from steel doors opened for 3 seconds. For 3 seconds, killed for 3 seconds, then sealed shut against retaliation. The Marines on the in the volcanic ash. The sand had nowhere to go.
They could
not run forward. Mulp, because forward was a wall of pre-registered fire. They could not run back, because behind them was the sea, and behind the sea, 6,000 miles of ocean. By nightfall, roughly 2,400 Marines lay dead or wounded on the beach. The invasion force had advanced less than 1,000 yards. In some sectors, they had advanced nothing at all. The planners had projected the entire island would fall in 5 days. On day 1, they had accomplished less than 1/10 of one day's objective, and the flamethrower tanks sat idle. They had come ashore in the 5th wave. All 8 of them. 4 attached to the 4th Marine Tank Battalion.
Dirty Joe.
4 attached to the 5th. They sat down behind a berm of volcanic ash. Engines cold, crews smoking cigarettes and listening to the screams that came off the beach.
Their orders were to wait.
Marine Command wanted to assess the tactical situation before committing these strange new machines. And the tactical situation on the night of February 19th was that there was no tactical situation. There was only killing. Some of the tank commanders wanted to move up. They were denied. They spent the first night of the battle listening to men die.
February 20th.
Morning came. The 21st 20th Marine Regiment had been ordered to seize Motoyama Airfield No. 1.
It was the
first objective of the invasion. It was supposed to have been taken by nightfall of day 1.
Sebs.
On the remained in Japanese hands, concrete pilpyaks covered the approach to the airfield. Their machine guns had already killed hundreds of Marines.
The regiment
had lost more than 1/3 of its strength. Marine had lost 48 the flame towers.
Juz?
In the early afternoon, a single M4A3R3 flame tank crested a low ridge of volcanic ash and advanced toward the Japanese pillboxes. Inside the tank, 5 men prepared for combat. The driver watched the ground through his periscope, guiding Dijon 35 tons of steel through sand that wanted to swallow it.
Thou?
The bowgunner watched for infantry. The loader watched the fuel pressure gauges. 300 pounds per square inch, holding steady.
It's a desert?
The gunner watched the pillbox through his sight. And the commander, standing in the turret with his hatch cracked open, watched the world he was about to change.
But
to the Japanese defenders inside the pillbox, the tank looked ordinary.
another Sherman.
They opened fire, another at maximum range, with a 47mm anti-tank gun. The shell struck the tank's frontal armor at an oblique angle and ricocheted skyward. The Sherman kept coming. It was 125 yards from the pillbox when the commander gave the order.
Done, Sir Rest.
Versed turret, the gunner traversed the turret. He aligned his sight of machine gun aperture. He depressed the flame trigger. There was a hiss of compressed nitrogen, a sound witnesses would remember for the rest of their lives. And then a rope of napalm thickened fuel, burning at roughly 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, poured out of the tank at 300 pounds per square inch and struck the pillbox aperture with the accuracy of a rifle shot. But the fuel flooded through without prejudice. The fuel flooded through the machine gun port. It flowed into the interior of the concrete structure. It filled the room like water filling a bathtub. And it burned. It burned the oxygen, faster than the men inside could scream. It melted the machine guns to their mounts. It fused the ammunition into slag. It cooked the concrete walls from the inside until they cracked from thermal shock. The men inside died in seconds. The tank commander rotated his turret and engaged the next position. By the end of the afternoon, the 21st Marines had advanced hundreds of yards.
Joe?
More ground than they had taken in the previous 2 days combined. And something began to spread through the American lines.
A whisper.
A rumor. Then a report. Then an order. By nightfall on February 20th, Marine battalion commanders across the island were rewriting their attack plans. Rifle platoons that had been ordered to assault at dawn were told to wait. Companies that had been dying to take fortified positions were pulled back and told to hold. The entire momentum of the American assault, the doctrine that Marines had been trained in for a generation, was being reversed in real time. Marines would not attack until flame tanks were available. Marines would not die to take pillboxes that a Zippo could clear in seconds. In seconds.
This had rarely happened before.
In the history of the Marine Corps, infantry did not wait for armor. Marines did not stop advancing. But Iwo Jima was rewriting the rulebook, one dead pillbox at a time. February 23rd. Day 5. 6 Marines and a Navy corpsman climbed to the summit of Mount Surbachi and raised the American flag.
Joe Rosenthal photographed them.
The photograph became one of the most reproduced images in human history. 3 of the 6 flag raisers would be dead within a month.
Betchins.
The battle was 5 days old. It had 31 days to go, and on the other side of the island, the flame tanks were about to face the greatest test of the campaign. Hill 382 was the second highest point on Iwo Jima. Kuribayashi had made it the anchor of his northern defense. It was honeycombed with bunkers reaching deep underground. Its approaches were covered by artillery, pre-registered on every square yard. Marines who fought there gave the ground around it a name. They called it the meat grinder. It would take from late February into early March to break it. It would cost thousands of American casualties.
Dub.
Light. On the day of the main assault, 4 flame tanks advanced up the slope in echelon formation. The Japanese were ready. Kuribayashi had studied the flame tanks in the days since their first appearance. He had seen how they killed. He had seen how they broke the will of his men, and he had adapted. His engineers reinforced apertures with steel plates and welded shields wherever they could be salvaged. Plates designed to open for a few seconds, allow a machine gun to fire, then close before the flame tanks could respond.
Thus, when the assault began,
They worked. The first flame tank fired. The napalm splashed against solid steel. It ran off the plate like water off a rooftop.
Dermationus.
The steel held. The bunker inside was untouched. The gunner fired again. Again the fuel splashed off. The Japanese's machine gun opened its shutter, killed Marines, and closed.
The meat grinder.
Was living up to its name. The tank commander watched through his sight. He saw something the Japanese had not fully anticipated. The steel plate hit repeatedly by 1500-degree flame was beginning to glow. Cherry red, then orange. Metal that hot did not stay flat.
Metal that hot warped.
It buckled. It cracked at the welds. The gunner held the trigger down. Doctrine said to fire in short bursts.
Doctrine to conserve fuel.
Doctrine said to conserve fuel. Doctrine did not apply on the slopes of Hill 382. The gunner held the flame far longer than any manual recommended.
Duh.
The fuel reserves dropped past the warning line. And the steel plate. A gap opened. The napalm poured through. Inside the bunker, Japanese soldiers who had believed themselves invincible discovered that they had been wrong.
Ja.
The ammunition in the racks cooked off in chain reactions. The crisp concrete walls cracked from thermal shock. The tunnel entrances hidden inside the bunker meant as escape routes, filled with smoke and superheated air. Men trying to flee deeper into the earth found themselves running into their own ventilation system. Carbon monoxide and dying in the dark corridors that Kuribayashi Kishidis had built to save them is
That tray.
It would take days more. But the myth of the impregnable Japanese bunker died on those slopes, in a cloud of black smoke and burning napalm, on a hill in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But not every position on Iwo Jima could be reached by a tank. There were ravines too narrow, slopes too steep, volcanic outcroppings where a 35-ton Sherman could not go. And the Japanese, understanding this, had built their toughest bunkers exactly there.
Sever.
On February 23rd, one of those positions blocked the advance of the 21st Marines. 7 concrete pillboxes built into ground that the flame tanks could not reach. The tanks tried to maneuver forward and could not. Their tracks slipped on the volcanic rock. Their hulls bellied out on obstacles.
The infantry was pinned down.
Marines were dying by the dozen, and the assault had stalled. Then, a 21-year-old corporal from West Virginia stepped forward.
Delay?
His name was Herschel Woodrow Williams. His friends called him Woody. He stood 5 feet 6 inches tall. He weighed 150 pounds. He was carrying a portable flamethrower on his back. The M22. 2 steel tanks of thickened fuel and 1 bottle of compressed nitrogen.
Dura?
Range 40 yards. Duration of fire only seconds of continuous flame before it emptied. Williams volunteered to go forward alone. 4 Marines went with him. Their orders were to protect him with their rifles while he advanced on the pillboxes. 2 of those 4 Marines would be dead by the end of the afternoon. Williams did not know this yet.
Joe Cho.
He only knew that the assault had stopped and that they had a weapon on his back that might work where the tanks could not go.
Menja.
For the next 4 hours, Woody Williams moved across ground that was under constant machine gun fire.
Sure.
He crawled on his belly.
Thou canst.
He advanced yard by yard through the volcanic ash. When the fuel in his flame tank ran empty, he crawled back through the fire to a supply point, exchanged the empty tank for a full one, and crawled forward again.
He did this again and again.
He silenced pillbox after pillbox. He killed men he could not see, hiding he could not see, hiding in bunkers he could not enter, with a weapon that gave him only seconds of fire and then left him defenseless.
Jet.
Shits. With position, Japanese chargist fixed Shitswada's flamethrower toward them and stopped their charge.
Joes. Alls.
7 Japanese pillboxes were silent. The 21st Marines resumed their advance, and Woody Williams walked back to his lines. Black with soot, his eyebrows singed, his uniform smoking, and reported to his commanding officer. He would receive the Medal of Honor. He would be one of the very few Marines on Iwo Jima to earn the Medal of Honor and survive the battle.
He would go home.
He would live for 77 more years. He would die on June 29th, 2022, at the age of 98.
Jiro.
From this Sivim.
Oh.
From the Second World Wars, in a hospital in Huntington, West Virginia, the war he had helped to win passed with him into memory. But in February of 1945, on the black slopes of Iwo Jima, Woody Williams was still just a 21-year-old corporal with a flamethrower on his back. The battle was only 10 days old. By the first week of March, the arithmetic of the assault had transformed completely. Marine attack plans were now written around flame tank availability. Company commanders would radio for a Zippo, the way they might radio for artillery. Infantry followed 50 yards behind the tanks, close enough to exploit the shock, far enough to avoid the heat that could singe eyebrows at 30 yards.
Joe Slestry.
Engineers with satchel charges moved to sealing the tunnel entrances the moment the flame had passed. A new tactic emerged.
Variations?
Marines later described the combined blind throwers and bleamy demolitions as the blowtorch and corkscrew method.
As the
blowtorch and corkscrew method, the tanks would spiral around a fortified position, keeping the enemy anti-tank guns confused, then close to point-blank range and deliver the flame.
Thud.
It worked. It kept working. Position after position fell to men and machines that had learned to fight together on the fly.
But the tanks were dying too.
In the second week of March, one of the flame tanks was destroyed when a Japanese soldier with an explosive charge reached its engine compartment and detonated himself.
Members of the crew died with him.
The tank burned. The fuel tanks, still half full of napalm, went up in a column of black smoke that Marines saw from a mile away.
Yeah.
Another tank was disabled and weak when a Japanese 5.7mm gun, larger and more powerful than the standard anti-tank gun, put a shell through its track. The tank kept firing while immobilized, creating a curtain of flame that covered the other tanks in its section. When it finally ran out of fuel, its crew abandoned it and fought on foot back to Marine lines. 6 tanks remained operational. Then 5. Then 4. Reinforcements were rushed from Hawaii. Less effective. Ronson systems with only 60 to 80 yards of range.
But they came.
Because Iwo Jima was not going to end quickly. Iwo Jima was going to end when the last piece of organized Japanese resistance had been broken. Early March. Cushman's Pocket, a complex of caves built into a near-vertical cliff face on the northern plateau. The Japanese inside had positioned themselves above the American approach. Everyone sells untouchable. Everyone was wrong.
But
one flame tank commander working with an infantry battalion pinned down beneath the cliff was ordered to try something no manual described.
The
Zippo could elevate its flame gun to roughly 35 degrees. Tektit, the commander, ordered his driver to position the tank on a mound of rubble that naval bombardment had created.
wretch.
The tank climbed the rubble, its rear settled, its hull tilted backward. The flame gun now pointed almost 40 degrees into the sky. Enemy mortar rounds were landing within yards of the tank. The gunner fired. The napalm arced high into the air. It rose in a burning stream against the pale Pacific sky. For a moment, it seemed to hang, weightless, at its apex,
Thus,
and then was point down. Fell, it cascaded down onto cliff-top positions, northward. It ran down the interior walls of the tunnels. It found the Japanese soldiers who had believed themselves the lives safe. Some of them leapt from the cliff. Rather than burn, they chose to fall. Marines below the cliff watched men in Japanese uniforms drop through the air and land at their feet.
in the middle of
March, the battle had lasted 3 times longer than the planners had projected. Casualties on both sides continued to climb. The 8 tanks that had begun the campaign were down to a handful of operational vehicles. Fuel was being flown in from Hawaii by transport aircraft, mixed at emergency stations behind the front lines, and delivered to the tanks in 300-gallon trailers under sniper fire. The men who kept the tanks running slept when they could, ate when they remembered, and did not speak of what they had seen.
Downa, Weczna.
Down in his command bunker beneath the northern plateau, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi wrote his final reports. His men were dying. His tunnels were filling with corpses. His radios, that the battle was lost. He had known from the beginning, but he had hoped to bleed the Americans white, to buy Japan time, to make the price of victory so terrible that the men in Washington might reconsider.
Chad.
He had not counted on 8 steel machines that could reach into his caves and pull his men out with liquid fire. He had built a fortress that could withstand every conventional weapon in the American arsenal. Tornston from a land, and in the end, that fortress had been broken open by something no Japanese officer had imagined possible. He sat down at his desk. He picked up his pen. He began to write his final message to Tokyo.
Drachinch.
March 21st, 1945. Day 31 of a battle that was supposed to last 5 days. The final Japanese stronghold on Iwo Jima was a twisted network of ravines and caves at the northern tip of the island.
Roughly 700 yards off.
Across at its widest point, 3,000 Japanese soldiers remained inside it. They were the last of Kuribayashi's 21,000. They had eaten the last of their rice a week earlier. They were drinking rainwater collected in helmets and shell casings. They had no medicine. They had no reinforcements. They had no hope of escape. And they were still fighting. The Marines had a name for the ground where these men would die.
Thuntelt?
They called it the Bloody Gorge. On the morning of March 21st, several flame tanks assembled at the edge of the gorge. It was one of the largest concentrations of flame armor in the history of the Pacific War. The original Zippos, patched and welded and cannibalized for parts, were joined by newer tanks that had been rushed forward from later shipments.
The machines that had begun this campaign as a secret
Cease.
experiment, Barrett?
In a fenced compound at Schofield Barracks, were now the centerpiece of the largest coordinated flame assault in American military history.
The Lynchard.
The lead tank had fired the first flame shot on February 20th. Its armor was covered in welded patches. Its tracks had been repaired multiple times. The paint on its hull had been burned away by its own weapon, replaced by a mottled surface of soot and heat scarring.
Inside,
The crew were older than they had been 30 days earlier. Not in years. In the way that men become old when they have seen too much. The tanks moved forward in a crescent formation. Behind them came Marine infantry with Whitesfors grenades. They would throw the grenades into cave entrances.
The white smoke would mark the target.
The flame tanks would then fire directly into the marked openings. Behind the infantry came the engineers, with satchel charges of explosive, ready to seal each cave the moment the flame had done its work. A systematic, unstoppable killing machine. Inside the caves, the last Japanese defenders knew what was coming, so some prepared for it. They tied grenades to their chests. They fixed bayonets. They wrote final letters to families they would never see again, and pressed the letters into hidden crevices in the rock where American soldiers might find them years later. Some refused it. When the sound of the tank engines grew close, they placed the muzzles of their rifles under their chins and pulled the triggers. Kuribayashi had ordered them to kill 10 Americans each before dying. Many of them at the end chose to skip the killing and go straight to the dying. The flame tanks fired for hours. Thousands of gallons of fuel mixture were consumed in a single day. Marines died in the assault.
Marines were wounded in the assault.
Hundreds of Japanese defenders were killed, most of them by flame. In one incident, a Japanese officer emerged from a bunker carrying a samurai sword.
He ran directly at one of the American tanks.
He did not throw a grenade with his sword raised. Marine rifleman. By sunset on March 21st, the bloody gorge had been penetrated. Organized resistance would continue for 4 more days. Iwo Jima was officially declared secured. On March 16th, 1945, although isolated fighting and a major Japanese counterattack continued until March 26th. The battle had lasted 36 days instead of 5. 6,821 Marines were dead. 19,217 were wounded. Total American casualties, 26,038. For the first and only time in the Pacific War, total American casualties exceeded the estimated number of Japanese killed during the battle. Kuribayashi had achieved his mission in the coldest possible sense. He had made Iwo Jima cost more than any commander in Tokyo had believed possible. But he had lost. Of the 21,000 men who had held Iwo Jima at the beginning of the battle, approximately 20,000 were dead. Only 216 were taken prisoner during the main battle. 216. In a battle of Japanese men who had been ordered to die.
It was a stunning break with the pattern.
If every previous Pacific island, higher than Tarawa, higher than Peleliu, not because the Japanese defenders had lost their courage, but because a weapon had arrived that made their courage bullets. You can face bayonets. You can face artillery. You cannot face fire that flows like water into the deepest hole you can dig. The flame tanks proved devastating against Japanese fortifications, but they were only one part of the combined American effort that eventually overcame the defenses of Iwo Jima.
During a minute,
Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi did not surrender. The exact date and manner of his death remain unknown. The Japanese historical record suggests he died sometime in the final days of organized resistance, most likely on or around March 26th. Some accounts say he led a final counterattack from his command bunker, and was killed in the fighting. Others say he took his own life underground, in the darkness of the tunnels he had built.
His body was
never identified. No one is certain where his remains lie. He is still, more than 80 years later, somewhere beneath the volcanic soil of the island he defended. Before he died, he sent his final reports to
Tokyo. He wrote that the battle was lost.
He apologized for failing to hold the island. He asked forgiveness for the men he could not save. His last messages included traditional Japanese death poems, verses in an old and formal style composed by an officer who knew he was writing his own end. In the days that followed, the small Japanese garrison on the neighboring island of Chichijima received a farewell transmitted from Iwo.
Goodbye from Iwo.
3 words. And then the frequency was still... Colonel Unmacht never met Kuribayashi. He never saw the island where his tanks had fought. He remained at Schofield Barracks throughout the battle, receiving reports, refining designs, preparing the next generation of flame tanks for the invasions to come. His work did not stop with Iwo Jima. Within weeks, his team was producing improved models with greater range and reliability. By mid-1945, dozens of new flame tanks were being readied for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of the Japanese home islands. Estimates suggested that invasion would produce hundreds of thousands of American casualties, and Japanese casualties on a scale that no one wanted to imagine. Counted Colonel Unmacht while building the weapons that would be used to break open the last defenses of Japan.
So?
On August 6, 1945, a single bomber released a single weapon over the city of Hiroshima. 3 days later, another bomb fell on Nagasaki. On August 15th, the Emperor of Japan spoke to his people for the first time in the history of the Japan Empire. And he told them the war was over. The flame tanks in the Pacific were placed in storage. Operation Downfall was canceled. The invasion of the home islands never happened.
So,
Colonel Unmacht now unprejudice his work. His compound at Schofield Barracks was quietly shut down. His team was reassigned. The technical reports of the flame tank program remained classified for years after the war. When they were finally released, most of the men who had built the machines were older, retired, or gone. The Seabees who had welded the fuel lines, the chemists who had mixed the napalm, the mechanics who had installed the electrical connections by hand in a fenced compound on Oahu. They had gone home to civilian life. They had raised children. They had worked in machine shops and electrical utilities and small businesses across America. They had told almost no one what they had done. The men who crewed the tanks came home too.
not all of them.
Several tank crewmen died at Iwo Jima. Others were lost on Okinawa a few months later. The survivors returned to America in the summer and fall of 1945. They took jobs. They married. They raised families. And most of them, for the rest of their lives, did not speak of the tanks. You can understand why. There is no vocabulary in an American living room for what it means to burn 30 men alive in a concrete bunker. There are no words at a family dinner table for the sound a Japanese soldier makes when napalm floods his tunnel. The men who did these things did not have a way to explain them, and so they did not try. They kept their memories in the same silent place where all combat veterans keep the worst of what they have seen.
Some of them held it.
Well, some of them did not. A few in their old age began to speak.
Most
did not. By the numbers, what they did was more than enough. Post-war analysts credited the flame tanks of Iwo Jima with preventing thousands of American casualties.
Estimates vary.
But every estimate points in the same direction. Thousands of men who would have died attacking bunkers that could not otherwise be cleared. Thousands of American families who would have received the telegram but did not. Thousands of fathers who came home. Thousands of men who married in the summer of 1945, raised children in the 1950s, sent those children to school, saw them graduate, held their grandchildren, grew old, died in beds surrounded by family. If you are watching this, there is a real chance that one of those men was your father, or your uncle,
Julius.
or the man who married your mother after her first husband died overseas,
Yes.
or the neighbor down the street who mowed his lawn every Saturday morning of your childhood, and never once mentioned that he had been a Marine on Iwo Jima, that he had lived because someone else, someone he never met, had spent months in a fenced compound in Hawaii, welding a nozzle onto the front of a Sherman tank. That is the arithmetic of the flame tanks. That is the balance sheet. The Battle of Iwo Jima ended on March 26, 1945. The war ended on September 2nd of the same year on the deck of the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Japanese officials signed the surrender documents while a nation and a generation of American servicemen watched. The war was over.
The killing was over.
The men who had crewed the flame tanks, and the men who had built them, and the men whose lives had been saved by them went home to a country that would spend the next 80 years trying to understand what they had done.
Iwo Jima
Was returned to Japan in 1968. Today the island is officially called Iwo in Japanese. It is a quiet place. The Japanese Self-Defense Force maintains a small garrison there. Ships pass in the distance. The old airfields are still visible from the air, though nature has begun to reclaim them. The caves are still there, most of them sealed. In some of them, the remains of Japanese soldiers still lie where they fell in March of 1945. Some have been recovered by Japanese search teams. Most have not. The volcanic soil keeps its dead well.
At
the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia, tanks and artifacts from Iwo Jima are on display.
Visitors walk past them.
Every day. Most of them do not stop long. School children on field trips take photographs and move on. Tourists glance and continue toward the next exhibit. The machines do not tell them what they did. The machines do not speak. But sometimes an old man will stop. He will stand in front of one of them. He will not say anything. He will look at it for a long time, in the silent way that combat veterans have learned to look at things. And then, when he is ready, he will walk on to whatever comes next. Because he knows. He knows what those tanks did.
He knows what they cost.
He knows that 8 machines built in secret in a fenced compound in Hawaii, crewed by boys who are now old men or old ghosts, helped bring an end to a battle that could have killed a generation. He knows that the arithmetic of war is not always visible on the surface. He knows that sometimes the men who save the world are not the ones who get the parades. Sometimes they are the ones who spend the rest of their lives. He's not talking about what they did. The flames of Iwo Jima have long since died.
The men
who lit them are almost all gone. But the arithmetic remains. 8 tanks, thousands of lives saved. A battle shortened. A war brought closer to its end. A generation of American men who came home to their wives and children and never spoke of the machines that had let them live. That is the story of the flame tanks in the hands of American Marines on a black volcanic island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, did in the last winter of the last Great War.
Rest easy, gentlemen. The nation you served remembers.